Marvin Johnson was coming home from work in a very cheerful mood. It had been a successful week so far, and he expected great improvements in his life. He was the president and owner of Midwest Financial Services, a company that provided accounting, investment, and management services in his county. The company was not super profitable, but provided Marvin and his 20 employees with a good income. This company had ties to his family. His great-grandfather, Nels Peter Johnson, was one of the founders of this town. He came to the prairies from Oskarshamn, Sweden, in 1868 with his 5 children. He and his children plowed the virgin prairie land with oxen and wooden plows. Marvin's grandfather was the youngest of the children and had broken his leg in a farm accident, so it was difficult for him to do the hard work on the land. Instead, after 4 years of schooling, he began working for a local store owner as a counterman and bookkeeper. At the age of 22, he married 18-year-old Birgitta Olafsdotter. 10 years later, he opened his own bookkeeping service when Marvin's father, Carl, was born. Carl took up bookkeeping after he returned from World War II. Successive Nels Peter heirs became mayors, bank board members, school board members, church trustees, and county commissioners. Business and civic engagement was firmly embedded in his DNA. At the last stoplight before pulling up to his house, he glanced over to the passenger seat and saw his always-used briefcase and a bright red 8x11 envelope. The envelope was emblazoned with the inscription, "A lifelong journey for the love of my life." The envelope contained schedules, brochures, and information about a 30-day vacation to France. The dates hadn't been set yet, but Marvin had arranged everything with Betty, one of his lifelong friends who owned a travel agency. They dated through 6th grade until she cheated on him with John Stanson by sitting with him on the swing set at recess. He didn't like the idea that she might be with someone else. They kissed once in senior year of high school. It was after Betty had been declared homecoming queen, and Marvin, the captain of the football team, had put the crown on her and then kissed her. He was supposed to call Betty after he talked to Cheryl tonight to see what dates they should go on. He knew Cheryl was already home since she had called him to see if he would be home soon. Marvin had left town to attend a university in his state. He met Cheryl his freshman year of college at a sorority and fraternity reunion. He was a freshman, but they enjoyed socializing with each other. Her major was French, and his was business administration, so they didn't have much in common academically. He was already in a relationship with a girl from nursing school, so he didn't ask Cheryl out that year. At the beginning of their senior year, they started hanging out and spending more time together. During the spring semester, Cheryl spent her weekends at Marvin's apartment. After graduation, he worked at a branch of a nationwide finance company. He stayed in town because he wanted to be close to Cheryl. It was hard for a young man to leave the campus. There were girls, drinking, girls, football games, drinking, and college parties. Why should a young man leave? Marvin had one reason to leave. His father said so. He was to come home and start working for his father in the family business. Marvin always knew that someday he would. For the next year, Marvin cranked up the odometer on his car, making Friday 4-hour trips to Cheryl's house and then coming home on Sunday. Being a romantic, he gave her an engagement ring for Christmas. Both mothers decided that a wedding in June would be a wonderful event. Cheryl now works 2 jobs at a local junior college to maintain a full-time job. Her favorite job is teaching French, both beginning and advanced level. Sometimes she helps out in philosophy classes when they start discussing French philosophy. Since her major in college was French, Marvin has often seen her curled up reading French newspapers and magazines online at their house. Her second job was finding graduate jobs and part-time summer employment. She has worked at a junior college since their 2 children were in 6th and 8th grade. Both had moved away from home, leaving Marvin and Cheryl to live in empty nest status. He smiled as he saw his home, given to him by his grandparents. They had given it to him because of his love of golf, and the house was only a block away from the country club. It was a beautiful place where they raised their children, made wonderful neighborhood friends, and lived comfortably. Today might just be his lucky day, because he had given her a trip for their 25th wedding anniversary. Their lives had been suffering for the past 6 months or so. Winter moping had set in, and it had become more difficult to go out and socialize. Cheryl was suffering from empty nest syndrome as their son left town for college and their daughter graduated and took a job in Kansas City. Menopause had not been kind to Cheryl and had made her moody, angry, and difficult to live with. She was nothing like the bright, enthusiastic, and loving young woman Marvin had married 25 years earlier. He hoped that a trip to France would add spice and happiness to their lives. This trip had been a dream of hers ever since she attended her first French class in middle school. She wasn't the most popular girl in school, but she wasn't a nerd either. The boys at her school were into cars and sports. The most popular boys dated the most popular girls. The rest of us just watched the world go by. Cheryl spent a lot of time learning French and dreamed of France when she went to bed each night. Marvin opened the front door and saw Cheryl sitting at the kitchen table. He smiled and said, "Good evening, dear. How are you doing on this beautiful February evening?" Cheryl looked up and replied without emotion, "Hi, I thought you'd be here earlier. What's that big red envelope? Don't you remember Valentine's Day was a week ago?" He replied, "I had planned to come earlier, but I had a very important errand to run. I apologize for coming later than I thought. The envelope is something that needs to be done tonight." He then placed his briefcase on the coffee table in the living room with the red envelope face down on top and headed for the kitchen table. Cheryl already had a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses on the table. It was obvious that she had already had 1 glass and was starting on the second. Pouring him a glass, she asked, "How was your day?" The question was asked as a conversation starter, but it didn't seem like she was really interested in what had happened to him that day. He started to answer, then saw the pen and paper in front of her glass and wondered if he was going to get a lecture on what he had done wrong this time. Instead, he replied, "My day went fine, but judging by the list in front of you, my evening will be more important than my day." Cheryl sighed and said, "Yes, that may be so. I've been doing some introspection to see where I stand in life. And more importantly, what I am going to do in the second half of my life. Many events over the past few months have pushed me to realize this. At the end of this year, I will be hosting my sorority's 25th reunion of alumni. 2 of them recently passed away from breast cancer." She took a deep breath and said, "My duties as mother, chauffeur, nurse, judge, and counselor for our children are complete. All I have left is to wait for the grandchildren to come along, so I can visit them for a couple hours once every month or 2. Cheryl looked him straight in the eye and said, "And that brings me to our marriage." Marvin swallowed and nodded that he was listening intently. Cheryl continued, "This June will be our 25th wedding anniversary. That's a very long time for 2 people to be together. Half of my sorority sisters already have second or third husbands. Where do you and I go from here? What's holding us together? And more importantly, what will keep us together for the next 25 years? Where will the spark to keep the fire going come from?" Marvin's thoughts raced down a road that had too many dangerous turns. He had to be very careful. He began by saying, "I understand what you're getting at. I have the same concerns about my own life. Some men fall into the middle-aged crazy category, buying Corvettes, wearing gold chains, and chasing young waitresses. Fortunately, I have a wonderful wife and have not contracted this disease. What can I do to make the next half of our lives interesting and worth waking up to every morning? If you have something in mind that we could do, please tell me, and I'll promise to do everything I can to make it work." "That's exactly why I love you, Marvin," she replied. "Most men ignore their wife's problems. They say, 'It's your problem, only you can solve it.' Here's my solution. I've always lived under someone else's roof. I grew up in my father's house, and then in college I transferred to a sorority. A month after I left the sorority house, I came here to live under your roof. Under the roof of the house your grandparents gave you for your wedding. I've always been sheltered by someone. I was never alone. Never." She continued, "Living with you has been fun, but lately it hasn't always been fulfilling. I'm the wife of the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the wife of a church board member, the wife of the president of the country club. Wife of this, wife of that, wife of that, wife of everything. No fame, just a leader's wife. Marvin, you're the sun, and I'm just one of the many little moons orbiting around you. I need to get out of this orbit or I'll go crazy. I have to get away from you so I can be me again. I love you desperately, but I need space away from you. You're a wonderful husband, father, friend, and lover, but you're just so damn marvelous. There's no room for me in this splendor. I have to leave. She hesitated, then said, with that thought in mind, I want to take a time out, a hall pass, a freedom frenzy, or whatever you want to call it, for 6 months. For the next 6 months, I'm going to live somewhere else and have no contact with you. It's going to be hard on both of us, as every hour I'll be wondering what you're doing. At the end of the 6 months, I'll come back to you, and we can make a plan for the rest of our lives. I expect to be the fun girl you fell in love with in college. I know you've been unhappy that I've been so cranky these past few months. You and I may need to get counseling, but I think it's best for both of us. Stammering, Marvin said, no contact. I realize I need to give you some space, but banning contact seems drastic. Our lives are so intertwined that it would be difficult to separate them. Tell me exactly how that would work, because I don't understand it yet. She replied, it would be as if we weren't married. You and I would go our separate ways. We would have our own interests, hobbies, and experiences. Lately, I've been reading about postmodernism. Postmodernism emphasizes the diversity of human experience and multiple perspectives. That's exactly what I want to do. I've already signed up for a Zoom course, Empowering Women, Changing the Balance Between Men and Women, with the famous Indian yogi Rashid Guru. Junior college has several courses on feminist theory, contemporary feminism, and different perspectives that I want to enroll in. I'm excited to start my journey towards empowerment. She continued, our separation is like a divorce, only without the hate and mistrust for each other. We'll be like lovers separated for 6 months. Military couples do that all the time and get along just fine. You'll mind your own business, and I'll be free to have a variety of human experiences with interesting people. He asked, you said you will act like a single woman and socialize with interesting people. Will that include dating other men? Cheryl smiled and replied, probably, but probably no one will want to take me out to dinner and a movie. Very coldly, he asked, as a single woman who probably goes on dates, are you also probably going to do that on these dates? Probably, followed her casual reply. How else can I maximize my experience as a woman? My only experience is with you. I want to be on the same level as you. You are using your previous experience. Now let me gain experience so I can give you pleasure. You're forgetting one little factor, said Marvin. We're married. I vowed that all my future experiences would be with you alone. You made the same vow. I have remained faithful to you, and I expect you to do the same. She replied, well, we'll see what happens in the next 6 months. We will make that decision at the end of my vacation. He countered, then there may not be an opportunity to bring you back into my life. You can just go on living with someone else, not me. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just sex. Nothing special. Cheryl replied, after 6 months without it with me, you'll be happy we're back together. Please don't make a big deal out of it. I'm striving to better myself, and the confidence I'll gain from seducing other men will make me a better lover with you and a more fulfilled woman in all other aspects. After all, I'm not a housewife like your grandfather. He commented, this 6-month period of no contact with me seems extreme. Maybe we can solve some of your problems with counseling for both of us? She replied, I don't want to just talk about it. I want to do it. It has to be cold turkey, or I will continue to rely on you for everything and I won't be able to improve myself. It has to be as if we're no longer married, so I feel free enough to come back into our marriage with a better attitude. I don't know if I can handle that, was the only thing he could say. No, Marvin, we need a full reconstruction of my brain as soon as possible. We'll stress for 6 months and not let this drag on for a year or two. Let it happen sooner rather than later until we get back to where we want to be as a couple. When do you plan to move out of our house? He asked. She replied, I've rented an apartment for 6 months and will start moving things there this weekend. Marvin nearly fell out of his chair. I was all he could squeeze out of himself. Finally, he whispered, Can we talk about this some more before we make such an important change in our lives? She took his hand and said, Thank you so much for talking to me about this. I think it will make our lives better in the long run. I love you so much for being understanding and for not being a jerk or a bully. He grumbled, You trust me too much. I don't understand why you're doing this, and I really don't approve of it. It looks like it's going to happen whether I give my consent or not. My feelings are not factored into this decision. He had to hit the pause button to react to this sudden event. He continued, My head is spinning with your plan. I just don't know what to ask or what to talk about. My brain is on overload. How about we go to bed and discuss it tomorrow night? Will you join me in bed, or has the separation already begun? She replied, Not now, dear. I want to work on the logistics of my move, but I expect to be in bed with you tonight. Marvin climbed the stairs to the bedroom and fell into bed. He was terribly tired and could not sleep a wink. But he could not sleep. Too many questions and too few answers kept him awake. He went from feeling sorry for Cheryl for her problems to feeling sorry for himself for not being more aware of her problems to prevent this breakup. Then rage awoke in him. Rage that while he was spending time and money organizing a 30-day trip to France for her, she was planning the dissolution of their marriage. Later that night, Cheryl snuck into their bed and snuggled against her husband's back. She gently kissed his shoulder, and he felt her tears as she whispered softly, I'm so sorry, Marvin. He just as quietly replied, I'm sorry too, Cheryl. She replied, I love you. To which he asked, Is that the last time I hear that from you? Cheryl whispered, I want our lives to be better, not worse, after my adventure. I plan to come back to you a much better wife and lover. In the 25 years of their relationship, Marvin rarely got up before anyone else. Today was no exception. Instead of making coffee and taking it to Cheryl while she was still in bed, which was a luxury for her, he went to the front door, pulled out his briefcase that was on the coffee table, slipped a red envelope into it, and walked out. He texted his good friend Roger from the car dealership and asked if he could stop by around 7 in the morning, knowing that Roger always arrived by 6:30 in the morning. Marvin remembered that both Roger and his brother Dan had recently divorced, and he needed practical and tactical advice. After Marvin explained to Cheryl that she was planning to break up to find herself, he looked at his friend perplexed. Roger said, It sounds like she already has a boyfriend, but she's not ready to commit to this relationship. She wants to experience it before she leaves you. If she's happy with her boyfriend in 6 months, she'll dump you. If he turns out to be unworthy of her time, she will come back to you saying, I am rejuvenated and ready to be your loving wife again. You are the base she can use to improve her situation with her lover with minimal risk to herself. Marvin asked the question, How do I protect myself from being used like that? Dump the bitch, and the sooner the better, Roger exclaimed. Put yourself in the driver's seat. You have to make the decisions. The day she moves out, you're going to file for divorce on the grounds that she left you. The divorce will take about 6 months either way, so if she leaves you, the divorce will be ready to be finalized. If you decide to get her back, however, you will simply refuse to sign the final document and stay married. The important thing is that you decide what you want to do with her, not her deciding what she should do with you. Remember, if she cheats and you let her come back to you, it will be easier for her to cheat again and again. One more piece of advice for you. Stay the good guy you are. Don't be an asshole and don't yell at her. That will only put up barriers that will hurt you in the future, both in the relationship and in court. Act like you understand and are complicit in her plans. If she doesn't have a boyfriend, it will be easier for you to work out your problems. If you act mean to her, she will have a hard time reconciling with you. If she doesn't cheat and you do, it will be a big problem for your marriage. She may resort to revenge, and that will add to your problems. You two are a great match. I want you to solve this marriage problem, not destroy it." "Great ideas, Roger. I knew you could help me," Marvin replied. Roger said, "No problem, brother. You know how to take care of the bank accounts before she gets to them, don't you? Also, before she leaves, collect as much data, messages, and emails from her devices as you can. That'll tell you if she's circling the drain and preparing to entertain someone other than you." As Roger led him out of the building, Marvin noticed a black BMW 430i convertible parked in the parking lot. He asked Roger if it was his car, and Roger replied, "So far, yes. The buyers at the used car auction this week have been inattentive, and I got a good deal on this barely used beauty." Marvin said, "Great, I'll take her. Does it need any work? If not, have your guys clean her up and I'll pick her up tomorrow. Don't haggle, just name a decent price." Inspecting Marvin's car, Roger asked, "Are you switching from a Honda?" Marvin replied, "I'll probably do more this year than I did this year." Marvin went to the office to analyze what needed to be done that day. Everything could wait a few days, so he told the staff he would be home to take care of another non-business related issue, but they could call him if they needed to. On the way home, he saw Betty's car parked outside the travel agency and stopped to tidy up an aborted trip to Paris. When Betty saw Marvin come through the door, she jumped up, squealed, and said, "How do you like the surprise in the red envelope? I bet she loved it." He tried to keep his composure and said, "Cheryl said she's leaving me. She's moving out this weekend, so there won't be a trip to France. How much do I owe you for all the work I did preparing this wonderful package?" Betty sank down in her chair, shook her head, and said, No, it just can't be. Cheryl never says a bad word about you. She loves you. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." "What happened?" "She says she needs space to be her own person, not the wife of a guy everyone in town knows and respects. Those are her words, not mine. It's like she already has a boyfriend to spend time with while I'm gone." "Betty, she's one of your good friends. Has she given you any hints that she has someone else?" Betty thought for a moment and replied, "She mentioned that there was a new cute young guy in the counseling department. That was her only comment. Then she never spoke of him again. Never even mentioned his name. As for the cost, you don't owe me anything. I learned a lot about this kind of trip and will use this as a guide for my other clients." He asked, "Please don't tell her the trip was canceled. It was supposed to be a surprise, and I was the only one surprised." As he got in the car, he noticed his phone was acting like a bumblebee. It had been off since morning, and now there were calls and messages waiting for him. All the messages were from Cheryl. "Please call me." Taking Roger's advice, he dialed her number. She answered immediately. "Marvin, honey, where are you? I missed you so much this morning. Can you talk now?" "Good morning, Cheryl. I have a lot on my mind after our conversation yesterday, and I thought a car ride would help," is what he replied. She replied, "I can take the day off and talk now if you want. I know I shook you to your core last night, and I'm worried about my wonderful husband. Tell me what you want to do. Meet now, over lunch, over dinner, after dinner. I need you to be with me as I'm afraid of what I think I want to do. I need your wisdom. Please, Marvin." Almost resenting her concern for him, he said softly, "I need more time to digest the implications of your divorce plans. I'll go to the office, close the door, turn off the phone, and contemplate the future. Let's make plans to have dinner together tonight, at the usual time, and discuss it further. I'll stop and get something to eat so you don't have to cook or clean up the kitchen. Is that okay with you?" She happily agreed and replied, "That would be great. I'll look forward to seeing you. I love you." "I love you too," burst out of his mouth before he could say anything else. Marvin's next stop was the bank. He paid off the joint credit cards with funds from the checking account and canceled them. The travel and Christmas savings accounts were divided and put into 2 envelopes. The last step was to separate and close the joint checking account. The new checking account was opened in his name only, and he put his half of the funds into it. Cheryl would receive her half in cash tonight. Marvin drove past the junior college to make sure Cheryl's car was in the parking lot. He placed his business card on her windshield with, "I look forward to seeing you tonight." He remembered Roger's advice to be as nice as possible until things got impossible. Keep the ego in check. She hadn't cheated yet. At home, he began to gather the information he needed. He knew her passwords were kept in a little book in her desk. He went through all her emails, received, sent, deleted, favorites, and archived with no obvious suitor. He made a copy of her entire contact list, going through each name looking for clues. He looked at every file that had been active in the last 60 days. Web search history on various search engines was reviewed with no unusual activity. There were several articles in women's magazines on how to begin rebuilding one's self-esteem after being overshadowed by a loved one. He flagged those articles for further study to know what she might be thinking. Cheryl's cell phone was part of a package deal that included internet and cable TV. He easily retrieved all of her messages for the past 60 days, as well as frequently called phone numbers. He wrote down the numbers of the 5 most frequently sent messages. They were all on her contact list, and the only name on the contact list that was unknown to him was Roberto. Marvin left the house and returned to the office to lay out his concerns, thoughts, and comments for the most important meeting of his life. Near noon, driving up to the house, Marvin saw Cheryl's car parked in the garage. He walked to the front door and remembered Roger's admonition. "Be nice until it's impossible." As he opened the door, he saw his wife walking toward him with a glass of wine. She looked at him and said, "I heard the garage door open, and I couldn't wait to enclose you in my arms." At that moment, she put her arms around his neck and pressed her lips to his. He returned the favor because this was the first passion he'd experienced in months, and he was going to savor it. She broke their embrace and said, "Why did you get an 18-inch pizza? You can't eat that much together in one night." "I know," he replied. "Leftovers are the beginning of me having to feed myself at night." "Oh, I forgot how much it would change your life." "Yeah, obviously you don't think about how much my life will change," he moaned. The first glass of wine and a slice of pizza were spent talking about who they'd socialized with that day and what was going on in town. Breaking the ice, he said, "Tell me about the apartment you rented." She replied, "It's a 200-square-foot, 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a new apartment complex being built north of Neely on 46th Street. It comes with a parking garage, clubhouse, and pool. It's the #1 building in the 5-story complex. They needed a quick return, so I offered a good price for 6 months' rent. They figure all the buildings will be completed in 6 months, and then they can start raising rents. But right now, they need cash flow. I'll be back in this house by then." He praised her. "Now that's smart money management, Cheryl." He asked, "Is the house furnished?" She wrinkled her nose and replied, "No, I may have to rent furniture for 6 months." He said, "Take what you need out of this house. What's here is too much for me. Especially take the bedroom furniture, since you have a special mattress for your back. Take also the TV. You are the only one who watches TV in bed. We can arrange for other furniture so you don't have to take so much off." Smiling, she said, "Thank you for being so considerate. You really are a wonderful person." He was tempted to say wryly, "Yes, but look what that kind of attention gets me. A wife walking out the door." But he didn't say it. He did, however, say, "I don't think you can fit all your stuff into a 1,200-square-foot apartment. What are you going to do with the extra stuff?" "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. I guess I'll have to leave them here for now." Marvin said, "I don't think that will work. If you leave, all of you will leave. You can't have that as a base when you're starting a new life." She pleaded, "I have nowhere to put it. My apartment is too small for everything I have here. Why can't you leave him here? I'll be back in 6 months. It won't hurt you to leave him here." I replied, "As I said, you are leaving and your things are leaving. I don't want to see your souvenirs while you're having fun with other guys. It leaves me with a bad feeling in my gut." She replied coldly, "You can be so thoughtful about providing me with a bed, yet be such a jerk about my unnecessary stuff. A real jerk. What can I do with my stuff except leave it here? Since you want to be independent, why are you asking me? You're leaving me for that reason, but now you need my help. You can rent a warehouse. They have them all over the city. By the way, who's going to move your stuff to the apartment?" She asked. "You have a pickup truck in your garage, so I thought I'd ask you to move my stuff to the apartment. Could you do that for me?" There you go again, desperate to get away from me, yet demanding that I do everything for you. You walk away, and then you don't get my moving services or storage services. I'll tell you what, if we make a deal that you move back into this house, I'll help you move back in. If we have an agreement, Marvin said. What do you mean, if we make a deal? Cheryl snapped back. It goes without saying that I'll come back here. Where else am I going to go? My plan is to come back here a better wife, a more confident person, and an experienced lover for you. That will put us on a new and better footing for the next 25 years. He replied, many things can change your plan. 1. You'll get infatuated with one of your new boyfriends and decide you want to play house for another 6 months, a year or 2 years, and I'll wait patiently for you. 2. You have so much fun with so many guys that I will consider you second-hand goods. No normal guy wants a city slut as a wife. 3. While you're starting your thrill machine, do you really think I'm going to sit in my garage and wait for you to come over and re-enter our marriage? That's not going to happen. Cheryl, after our first conversation on this subject, I did some digging on myself. As long as I don't have my wife around, maybe I should think about whether I should trade her in for someone else. Swap? What does that mean? She asked. Marvin explained. Just like if your car gets old and stops working, you swap it out for a newer model. I would also like to trade my wife for a younger and more interesting wife, not an old one. Marvin really wanted to say, swap for a younger, thinner, and prettier wife, but he decided it wouldn't do. Look, Buster, she growled. I'm doing this to improve my womanhood for you. You don't need to go out looking for a new wife. I don't like that idea at all. He said quietly, and I don't like your idea either, but you told me I had no say in your decision. You were going to do it regardless of what I said. You didn't consider my feelings about having a cheating wife. So while you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want for 6 months. Let's see where this ends. Cheryl hissed. It's not the same thing. I look to other men for companionship. I look to you for intimacy. Interaction is purely a physical connection with little to no meaning. She was on a roll and said, Intimacy is when you love each other from heart to heart. We already have intimacy, and it will continue after I return. You just can't do it, Marvin. You just can't. I need you to be there for me when my 6 months are up. Thanks for letting me be your plan B in case your free pass doesn't work out for you. You can stop me from switching if you don't move out. If you move out, I'll consider myself as unmarried as you are with your likely dates. And Cheryl thought that this was not working out the way it should. A husband should be sensitive to his wife's needs and allow her to explore her potential and adventures. To change the subject, Marvin held out a large envelope to her and said, I used our joint checking account to pay off our joint credit cards and then canceled them. I then closed all of our joint accounts, and your half of the money is in this envelope along with the 50-50th split of the proceeds. You will need to open new accounts to get the cash. I haven't touched the credit cards you have in your name only. You're making this too complicated and too structured for me to just give you some time, she replied. It's not that important. He replied, but it is very important to me. When a wife leaves her husband, it's a very big deal. While we're working out the logistics of the breakup, you'll need to get a junior college health insurance policy. My policy will cover you until the end of the month, but you'll need to get it taken care of. Continuing, he said, You wanted to be a big girl and do big things on your own. Well, that's what big girls do when they're left to themselves. They don't have a man looking over their shoulder and helping them when needed. You said you wanted to be away from me so you could grow and expand your experience. Cheryl grimaced and asked, "Are you still going to take a crap on me? Or are you going to wait and spew it out on me?" He solemnly replied, "Yes, there is one more thing. Probably the worst one of all. The day after you pack up and leave, I'm going to file for divorce on the grounds that you've been dumped. Before you stab me to death with your fork, let me finish." He sighed heavily and said, "You want 6 months' freedom. A divorce will take at least 6 months. At the time your self-awareness study was supposed to be over, the trial would be over. If we agree to be together again, we will not sign a final divorce decree. The litigation will end, and we will remain husband and wife. If you decide you have found a new life or love, we will sign the divorce and neither of us will have to wait for a divorce. That being said, let me say this to you again. I don't want to divorce you. I love you and I want you to stay with me, to grow old with me. But I will not stand by while you do this with others without finalizing the divorce process. I want it to be public so I'm not perceived as Cheryl's cuckold husband who sits at home while she gets new boyfriends. Can you understand my position?" She quickly replied, "No one will know with whom, or even if I'm doing it with someone else. No one will ever know." He immediately replied, "Just like no one will know that you and Roberto go out to lunch a couple times a week." "Are you following me?" replied Cheryl. "I had no reason to follow you. Acquaintances just said they saw you with a young Hispanic man. I believe it was Roberto. It was him, wasn't it?" Ignoring the question, Cheryl snorted, "You're a real asshole, an absolute asshole. I'm trying to improve and you're putting up all these obstacles. It's just not fair. It's not fair at all. I guess I'm making the right decision to move away from an asshole like you, Marvin Johnson." With those words, she jumped out of the house, slammed the door, and drove away. He thought, typical, when she doesn't get her way and has no way to get back into the conversation, she jumps in the car and drives away. This time, she might not be back for a while. And if she doesn't, that's okay, because she was going to leave anyway. Marvin spent the rest of the evening taking pictures off the walls. He carefully put all the pictures of his wife in a box, hoping she would have an epiphany and end her 6-month odyssey. He didn't want to create an irreparable problem. The box contained their wedding photos and wedding album. All the photos and knickknacks he wanted to keep, he put away so the movers wouldn't stuff them into the boxes of belongings. The house looked empty and cold, and the boxes of photos stood along the living room wall. He was also glad that she thought it was generous of him to refuse the bedroom furniture. It wasn't generosity. He thought her favorite French provincial furniture was completely out of place in a mid-century modern house. He was glad to be rid of it. The accusation of being a jerk hurt him. He didn't want to come across as such an indifferent person. After all, he really didn't want her to leave, but he wasn't going to divorce her either. However, he wasn't going to let her have fun with other guys and then come back into his life like nothing had happened. He didn't want to be at a table in a club when one of her former lovers came to ask her to dance and try to convince her to leave with him that night when cuckolded Marvin would be sitting at the table. Just 3 miles down the road was a supermarket that had a flower store. He jumped into his Honda, rushed to the supermarket, and bought a dozen long-stemmed roses. He put them in a place where she would see them as soon as she appeared. An offer of peace, an offer to tone down the rhetoric to calm the situation. Around 10 p.m., he heard the garage door open and realized the car door had slammed shut. The door swung open with force. It stomped 6 steps into the house and stopped. Marvin was watching the news, looked up and said hello. "Good evening, dear." A few seconds later, he heard her say, "What beautiful flowers, are those for me?" "Of course they are for me. You're the only one here who deserves them." He grinned back. "I appreciate your thought, and I'm very glad you did. I was afraid we'd start fighting again as soon as I walked through the door." I didn't like the way this conversation ended and wanted to turn the volume down while you work on your proposed adventure. I understand what you want to accomplish, but we need to talk about your sex with someone else. Is that okay with you? Of course I do. But first, aren't you going to ask where I went? He said, I don't need to know where you are. I want to know you're safe. She explained. I was safe at the local Starbucks, wondering what I should do. I have a lot of things on my mind, hard things, decisions that will change the direction of my life as long as I live. I know what I want to do, but the consequences could make my life great or just ruin it forever. I just don't know what to do yet. Happy, he said. I'd be happy for you to stay here as long as you want, but I'd rather it be forever. You're the sweetest person in the world. I really love you. He replied, I love you too. This suggestion of yours has suddenly given me an idea. I think if you give me time to think it over, we can come to some kind of amicable agreement on how we should proceed. In the meantime, you have time to move or deposit your belongings. That will give me time to learn how this house works, how the stove works, the dishwasher, etc. He desperately wanted to slow down the breakup process and take control of it. She said, I'd like to discuss this with you further too. He said, Can we postpone the rest of the conversation until tomorrow night? Yes, please, she replied. I'll clean up the kitchen and you go to bed. The next morning he got up at the usual time, made coffee and brought it to his wife. Good morning, love, he said, setting the coffee on the night table and putting his hand on her shoulder. She rolled over onto her back and, smiling broadly, said, Good morning, my spectacular husband. Marvin busied himself getting ready for the workday. Cheryl was taking the day off. He hoped she was rethinking her decision to leave him. She was going to call moving companies and arrange storage locations. The first order of business was to call a lawyer she knew. She knew she couldn't use a family lawyer since her husband had probably already talked to one. She managed to make an appointment for half an hour at 3:30. She needed to go to the bank to open accounts in her name. She was still mulling over the decision to leave, but she wanted to get all the business done, even if she decided to stay at their house. The idea of leaving was still intriguing, but it came with some long-term problems. Attorney Dan Parks let Cheryl into his office at 3:30 and asked her to be brief because he had an important meeting at 4. She told him she was leaving for 6 months to gain confidence and self-belief. At the end of this period, she planned to return to her husband. Although her husband said that this option might not be acceptable to her. It depended on her having contact with someone else. She said that Marvin would file for divorce as soon as she moved out. Dan said the way Marvin split the bills 50% each and the paperwork was very fair. He'd seen better than that. According to her, the conversations were cordial and violence was not even in question. When asked if she loved him, she said, Yes, I love him very much. Does he say he loves you? Yes, he is very demonstrative about it. He gets very annoyed that I have fun with other men. He just can't get over it. I think he's being unreasonable. Dan said, There are a lot of men who think that way. Mostly men who don't cheat on their wives think that way. They usually make good husbands. In the divorces I handle, the cause of divorce is usually adultery. Adultery and divorce usually go together. She countered, But that's different. I can have fun with other men to improve my opinion of myself as a woman of the world. I have only been with one man in my entire life. In 6 months, I'll be back with Marvin, just like I was before. Dan said, That doesn't change anything. Adultery is adultery, no matter the reason, occasion, or time. Marvin is doing you a favor by not filing for divorce on the grounds of adultery. That would be very embarrassing for you. Whatever the reason for filing, Cheryl, I would be happy to be your attorney in any divorce proceeding. I will protect your rights, and right now, it appears that Marvin is being an honest man. She finished her business and research, then headed home and was surprised to see a black BMW convertible in the driveway. She wondered whose car it was and why Marvin's Honda wasn't around. When she approached the house, there was no one in the BMW and the garage door was unlocked. Cautiously opening the door to the kitchen, she saw her husband pulling a beer out of the refrigerator. She asked, Whose car is in the driveway? He replied, That's my car. The Honda is gone, and I traded it in for a BMW. The words swapped gave her an uneasy feeling in her stomach. She said, I didn't know you wanted to get rid of the Honda. I thought you really liked that car. He replied, I know, it just seemed that way to me. She asked, Where did you get the money for such a beautiful car? We always discussed important decisions together before filming. As soon as she said those words, she felt like punching herself in the face. She knew she was now doing what she had just rebuked him for. She had made herself look like a hypocrite, and she knew it. Before he could call her out on it, she said, That sounds awful, considering what I offered you this week. I'm sorry for picking on you because what I did without talking to you was 1,000 times worse. He replied firmly, I guess we have one set of rules for me and another for you. As for the source of the money, I sold the Honda and took the balance from a special savings account for a special project that didn't pan out. I had a lot of unallocated cash and used it to replenish the balance. It's a nice car, isn't it? She wanted to change the subject quickly and asked, The living room looks different. Did you take the pictures down to clean them? He replied, No, the pictures of you are in a box in the hallway, waiting to go to a new home if you leave. I'll fix the holes and repaint the wall if you want. Then I'll hang them back up if you're staying. Otherwise, I'll redo this wall the way I want it. She didn't like her husband remodeling her house. It was a wife's duty, which she refused to do. Instead of calling him on it, she said, Can we talk a little? I spent some time with Dan Parks today. He told me that you would be very fair to me if you decide to get a divorce. Marvin, I appreciate that you're such a good man. You are too good to me, and I am not as good to you as I should be. He said he would represent me if you filed for divorce. However, I don't want you to divorce me. She continued, After thinking about this topic all day, I have definitely decided that I want to move into this apartment and live a different life for 6 months. Last night as I was leaving here, an encouraging incident happened to me. A nice gentleman, seeing that I was upset, bought me a latte at Starbucks, and we spent the evening talking. He invited me over to his house to drink alcohol, but I declined. I said no because I was afraid. I just wanted company. I just proved to you and myself that I can socialize with men without doing it. Without pausing, she said, Since your main objection to my moving is possible contact with other men, I promise that I will try my best not to have sexual relations with anyone. That will be on my list of goals for the marriage break. You have been very kind and understanding on this issue. Even Dan has spoken up about it and advised me to make the right decision as I have a great relationship with a wonderful husband right now, and it would be a shame if I ruined it. She straightened up and said, I have a team of movers coming the day after tomorrow to move all my stuff into an apartment or storage unit. I'll leave you my address so you can forward any mail and get divorce papers sent to it. We can take turns calling the kids. I'm sure they'll be furious with me. Marvin, everything will be fine. It will be hard at first. But we've been through hard times before, and we've gotten stronger together. I'm sure we will continue to do so. Please remember that I love you, and 6 months and 1 day from today, I will love you just as much as I did last night. He thought for a moment before he said, I thought we were going to take it slow, but obviously that's your decision, not mine. I was going to bring it up later, but now I'll have to. Please cross my golf buddies off your list of people you want to entertain. Doing it with any of them will completely eliminate the possibility of us getting back together. Besides, he continued, after our divorce, you'll be removed from the country club membership list. You'll be able to come there as a guest of your Friday night women's group, but you can't come without a member bringing you. You can't take anything from the club. If I'm there when you come, I'll treat you with respect and kindness, and I hope you'll do the same with me. He slowly stood up and said, As for your leaving, I hope you have a good time. With those words, he turned and made his way to the bedroom, closed the door quietly, and went to the bathroom where he threw up. Cheryl sat on the couch, trying to dab away her tears with a handkerchief. She had been working on putting this number together for months, but it hadn't turned out the way she wanted it to. She thought she would have fun dancing in her new life, knowing that Marvin, her mainstay, would be there to pick her up if she fell. Just like he had done for the past 25 years. She wanted it so badly, but now it had dangerous consequences she hadn't foreseen. She thought of herself as a strong American, ready to tackle the world alone. But she was still crying. She tried to sleep in the guest room, but she was unsuccessful. There were so many memories of her, her husband, and her children in this house. All those memories turned into ghosts that haunted her with one question. Why Cheryl? Why? And she had no suitable answer. She got up several times that night, went to the master bedroom door, startled, and went back in. And she heard him making coffee and prayed that he would bring her a cup, sit with her, and tell her everything would be okay. But instead, she heard a door slam and a BMW pull away from the driveway. The car he had traded in. It became obvious that this was his hint that he was willing to change his relationship with the woman if she left. She shuddered at the thought that he might trade the car for a woman younger and prettier than her while she explored herself. What would happen to her then? How would she be able to switch? Swap for a younger, fitter man? That was doubtful. Maybe some man in his 60s would be willing to trade with her? Some swap Marvelous Marvin for an old man worried about her spending all his Social Security money and coming home by 9:30 p.m. to watch the news. When Marvin got to the office, it was dark, as was his mood. He immediately opened his computer and started making lists, sublists, calendars, and project deadlines. After a night of agony, he decided to make up for the years he had missed. Missed things he wanted to do but couldn't because his now potential ex-wife didn't want him to. He was going to take more golf lessons from a professional and at least 10 strokes off his handicap. He bought a box of A. Fuente Rosado Gran Reserva to smoke them on the back porch of the house. Hell, he could even smoke them in the house. He wouldn't have to spend boring Sunday afternoons with her sister. He started figuring out what he could do to enjoy life more, like Cheryl was going to do. She wouldn't kill his spirit by leaving him, but instead would strengthen it. Cheryl spent the day packing and getting ready to move. Deciding what would go to the apartment and what would go to the storage unit was difficult. After all, these were things that were important to her. But she had to cull those things to fit them into her new life. She was glad when Marvin called and invited her to dinner that night. At 6 o'clock that evening, Marvin pulled up to the house wearing his fancy new clothes and wool hat. He opened the door of the BMW in front of Cheryl, just as he had done when they first started dating. Even though it was chilly, he put the top down and they sped down the block. And he took her to a new French restaurant and they had a great dinner. It was great because that was all they talked about. All the other topics that were important to them had already been covered or were too delicate to discuss. He put the roof down and they took the long drive home, both looking forward to their last night together. There was no frozen wall between them. They simply had nothing to say to each other. When they got home, she asked him to sit with her for a while. She began the conversation this way. I must commend you for handling my desire to change my image in a gentlemanly manner. You didn't yell, scream, or forbid me to start this journey. I apologize for calling you an asshole earlier in the week. I was upset. You have been very patient with me and I appreciate that. He replied, The reason I didn't get defiant is because the chasm between us has been growing for almost a year now. We don't have the loving vibes between us that we used to have. You have been distracted and distant from me. I tried everything I could think of to bring us back together, but it wasn't meant to be. He continued, You are in a position now where no one can give you happiness. You have to do it yourself. I hope that this separation will bring joy back into your life and that we can be together again. But I doubt that will happen. That's why I will file for divorce tomorrow. I don't see us ever being together again if you plan to act like a single person. She said, You're a forgiving person. You always have been. Until now. Remember when Molly was having fun with her boss while on a business trip? Tom forgave her, and now they are happier than ever. We can reconcile too. He said, In your example, you're not taking all the facts into account. Molly and her boss were drunk and celebrating the conclusion of a major contract, a spontaneous reaction to circumstances. No one planned for this to happen. You plan to entertain someone else despite my objections, and in spite of your wedding vows to be faithful. Deliberately, he said, You plan to deliberately humiliate me for your own sense of power and liberation. This shows a complete disregard for my feelings. I don't want to wait for a divorce for another 6 months after you return from Fantasyland. You have fun with someone and then divorce them. It's as simple as that. He continued. When we meet again in 6 months, I'll ask you if you've been faithful to me, and I'll expect you to tell me the truth. I won't have a private investigator come after you. I won't tap your phone or put a VCR in your bedroom. The truth will always find a way out. You have to do this on your word of honor. No honor, no marriage. Cheryl snapped back. Contrary to what you think, I'm not going to have fun with anyone. It's not part of my plans. But if it happens, then it happens, and we'll have to face it when we get back together. Abandoning what has been between us for 25 years because I sought the pleasure of another man for one night is an outdated concept. I desperately want to remain your wife for the next 25 years, but I feel I need to separate from you to regain a good self-image and attitude. I'm sorry we didn't agree on this. Ma'am! Marvin kissed her goodnight at the door to the guest room and went to the master bedroom alone. The bed he shared with her was leaving his house, as was Cheryl's. The next morning he got up as usual, dressed as usual, made coffee as usual, and perhaps for the last time, held out the cup to Cheryl. She hugged him and told him how much she loved him. She put her arms around his neck and said, Marvin, my love, I will be back in 6 months to complete our love story. He nodded his head and went to the office. Why? He didn't know, but there was nowhere to go. Later that morning, Cheryl walked around the house with a box of tissues while all of her possessions were packed into boxes and loaded onto the truck. Workers have seen this kind of reaction before. Divorces, deaths, bankruptcies, and job changes cause the same rush of emotion. Marvin removed all his clothes from the dressers in the bedroom so Cheryl wouldn't have to do it. The closet items were loaded first, the rest went to her new apartment. For $100 a month, she hadn't counted on it. As she walked out the door, she turned around and wondered if she would ever see the inside of this house again. She figured she would know the answer to that question in 6 months. Week 1 of 26. After the movers unloaded all of Cheryl's belongings into their proper places, she sat down on a crate with the intention of accomplishing a dreadful task: to call her children and tell them that she had left their father to go on a social adventure. She and her daughter Cindy had always been close and basically like-minded, so she called her first. Cindy answered with a cheery, "Hi, Mom." After some small talk, Cheryl moved on to the most dreaded topic. She said, "Cindy, I left home to complete my self-examination and become a complete woman, Cheryl 2.0, if you will. I plan to return to your father after 6 months as an enlightened woman. It will be hard on your father and me, but I feel it will be best for both of us." Cindy asked, "Does Dad think it's for the best?" "No," Cheryl replied. "He plans to file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment Monday morning." Cindy shrieked, "What have you done, Mom? This is beyond comprehension. What prompted you to do this?" Cheryl replied, "I've been reading about modern women floundering in the shadows of their prominent husbands. This plan of women's lib puts me on the same level as your father socially, emotionally. He is afraid that by socializing with new people, I will start having fun with my new acquaintances. I told him that relationships with other guys is at the bottom of my list of accomplishments during this period. It's not completely out of the question, but I won't pursue it or look for it in a new relationship." Continuing, she said, "In the rare circumstance that it does happen, if it does happen, I will only do it for sexual interaction, not intimacy. I'll save that for your father, so he shouldn't be so wary of my activities. He's not as enlightened on the subject as I am. He's filing for divorce on a technicality because he doesn't want to appear to be married to me while I'm single and possibly seeing other men. It's such a Victorian attitude." Cindy said, "I hope you realize what you're doing. If you continue with this idiotic idea, you'll end up having lots of relationships but absolutely no intimacy. Daddy won't put up with it and will go for a divorce." Changing the subject, Cindy asks, "Now that you're acting like you're single, how will that affect your plans to go to France?" "What plans? I don't know anything about any plans." Cindy cringed. "You mean to tell me you made plans and planned to leave him while he was preparing the trip of a lifetime for you?" Betty, Daddy and I have been working for months to organize this trip. He rented an apartment on the Champs-Élysées for 30 days with a balcony overlooking the Eiffel Tower. He even coordinated time off with your boss. You probably gave him the ridiculous idea before he told you about the trip. The blood rushed from Cheryl's face when she said, "Oh no, I had no idea. Why didn't he say anything about it? I would have postponed the separation." Cindy replied, "You ruined the marriage before he could give you that gift. If you had done that to me, I would have wiped that canceled trip in your face. I would have let you know what a fool you are. Daddy didn't do that. That's the kind of man he is. You insult and disrespect him, and he doesn't lash out at you. Mom, you can find 1,000 guys for fun, but you'll never, never, never find a man as good as the one you're cutting out of your life." With those words, Cindy cut the conversation short, leaving Cheryl stunned and surprised. They had always been close. She needed to call Marvin and find out about this mysterious trip. After dialing the number several times, but the connection dropped each time, she decided she was blocked. Perhaps he was also directing her emails to spam. After work on Friday, as she was preparing the evening meal, there was a knock at the door. Opening the door, she saw a man who asked, "Are you Cheryl Johnson?" When she answered, "Yes." He handed her a brown envelope and said, "You have been served." Before he left, he took advantage of her shock and took a picture of her. She thought, "This is it. 25 years together, and I get a brown envelope. Luckily, it's only for 6 months. Otherwise, it would have been a horrible experience." Week 2. Cheryl went through her contact list and dialed Betty's number at the travel agency. Betty answered, "Hi, Cheryl. I thought you would call me at some point." She asked, "Is it true that Marvin has organized a 30-day trip to Paris?" Betty replied dramatically, "Yes. It was the most romantic and elaborate trip I've ever organized. The bright red envelope made Valentine's Day once again. You would have been blown away by what he had arranged. It's a shame you'll miss it." Cheryl asked, "Did he have a grudge against me?" Betty snapped back, "What do you think? He spent so much time, effort, and money to do something wonderful for the most important person in his life. And instead, she tells him she's leaving for an opportunity to have fun with someone else. Cheryl, you are one of my closest friends. I hate to talk to you about this, but I just don't understand what you did. Please don't even try to tell me. I don't want to know. By the end of this stupid 6 months, you'll have to stand in line to get a date with your ex-husband. We're still friends, so let's drop the subject." After the call, she drove to Marvin's house. His BMW was parked there, so she entered the building, saw Karen, his personal secretary, and said, "Hello, Karen. May I speak to Marvin?" Karen shyly replied, "Marvin's not home right now." "But I saw his car out front, Karen," said Cheryl. By this time, Cheryl felt everyone in the office looking at her. They were watching and wondering what was going to happen next. These were people she knew and enjoyed socializing with at company parties. She said, "Thank you, Karen," and turned to leave. She heard Karen say quietly, "Goodbye, Cheryl." So this is what lack of direct contact means, Cheryl thought to herself. She felt herself losing control of the situation. Sitting in the car and looking at Marvin's BMW, she called her son Robbie. He always answered her calls, even if he was in class. He would just acknowledge the call and say he would call back. This time, there was no answer, so she left a message on her voicemail and went to her house. After Cheryl left his office, Marvin came out to thank Karen for telling him he wasn't home. "I know it was hard for me to lie to her, but absolutely nothing good would have come out of me and Cheryl arguing in the office. Thank you for not putting the entire staff in such an embarrassing situation." A week later, the Johnsons' house looked more like Marvin Johnson's sports bar. Motivational and encouraging posters hung on cabinet doors. A calendar marked game times, golf lessons, and after-work hangouts with the boys. On the walls of the family room, pictures of Augusta National and St. Andrews replaced pictures of Marvin and Cheryl on vacation. He went head over heels for work. He never came home again, just because Cheryl wanted him there. The notes on the refrigerator door reminded him of the dishes he loved, barbecue and Chinese food, which Cheryl couldn't stand. He looked forward to grilling steak and eating melon on the patio, not caring if its juice spilled onto the deck. She liked the house to be quiet while she was home. The stereo system throughout the house was programmed to play jazz music, Margaritaville, and a little reggae, depending on her mood. Anything Cheryl didn't want to hear in the house. He also purchased more masculine bedroom furniture. Instead of Cheryl lying on her right side, there was a large body pillow to cuddle with until the pain subsided. 2 weeks after doing what he wanted to do, he realized his house needed cleaning. He called the junior college employment office on a day he knew Cheryl wasn't working there. He knew all the employees since his wife worked there part-time. He asked Mary, the department manager, if she could find a pretty student who could sweep and dust for him. Mary good-naturedly teased him that he had lost his housekeeper. Marvin liked the joke and told her that whatever the new girl would take would only be a fraction of what the previous housekeeper had cost him. That made Mary laugh, and she said she was glad he hadn't lost his sense of humor. He knew it was bound to get to Cheryl. Every day, Cheryl left a phone message for Robbie to call her back. Weeks 3, 5. The next few weeks, Marvin and Cheryl spent working, living, and learning a different way of life. Cheryl attended classes, but she was a little put off by the feminists who were her classmates. They had more of a hate men attitude than a wife enhancement attitude. End of part 1. Part the second of may be coming out in 10 hours. Write in the comments if you're waiting for it. Also, give a like under this video and subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video.